Joining me today, we have Kat Wang with White Ops Security. Welcome, Kat. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dory. Welcome everyone for joining today. My name is Kat, as Dory mentioned. I am the Senior Director of Business Development at White Ops, global leader in bot detection and mitigation. I'm excited to be moderating our fireside chat for today. Our speakers are Renee Forney, Senior Director of Cyber Assurance at Capital One. A little bit more about Renee. She is a consummate security expert and visionary, earning the honor of SC Magazine's 2016 Women of Influence Award and IACT's Igniting Innovation Award. Currently, she serves as Capital One's Senior Director of Cyber Assurance and is responsible for cyber third-party management, M&A, cyber due diligence, customer authentication, and PCI. Previously, Renee has served as the Deputy CIO for the Department of Energy and the Executive Director for the Cyber Skills Management Support Initiative at the Department of Homeland Security. In addition to Renee, Dr. Russell Handorf joins us as well, works for White Ops as a principal threat intelligence hacker, where he develops technology to detect and deter advanced botnets. Prior to this, he spent over a decade at the FBI serving in the Cyber Division's Technical Operations Unit as a computer scientist, where he developed and implemented technology that aided in the most critical investigations of criminal and national security matters. Welcome both. Thank you for joining us. So hopefully we've all had a chance to let the dust settle a bit since most of the world went into full remote working. As we adjust to the new world order, the collective security community is also recognizing that the marketplace for fraud has expanded. Today, we'll be having a fireside chat with not one, but two industry leaders with extensive backgrounds in government agencies and the financial sectors. And we'll be discussing the evolution of cyber criminal behaviors, new threat models, and approaches to fraud attribution. So Russell, let's start with you. What are you seeing in the broader space as a principal on the threat intelligence team?
Well, currently, as it relates to current events, when there's an opportunity, actors will take that any chance that they have to seize and monetize that particular event. And in my prior life, it was natural disasters. You would see fake hurricane relief funds get stood up in order to steal and swindle money out of charities, or promote themselves as a false charity and steal directly that way. But what currently we are seeing is a shift of not just the stereotypical fraud associated with charity relief and credential stuffing and things along those lines. It's because people are now working from home that there is now a new opportunity as it relates to new types of fraud and how fraud is also conducted. Because from how it is also conducted, the actors are people too, and they are having to figure out how to run their criminal enterprises in this new work from home situation as well. So it's been interesting for us to see how the different types of crimes are changing. And I'll pick on ransomware as an example, where there was a period of time in which maybe about a month and a half ago, well, actually no, 2 months ago at this point, that there was a lull in ransomware, and it was because the call centers, I feel, it was because of the call centers were not able to sustain the interaction and support required in order to further support that criminal enterprise. Because if people called to get assistance and there was no one there to answer the phone, then there would be less chance of a payout on the other end of the spectrum. But yeah, it's been interesting to observe how the developers of malware and the delivery of fraudulent tools is being conducted and who they are targeting as well. So it's that's kind of the interesting play on this one, because usually the disasters are more local and geographic and not as global as this one is. So it's been interesting to see the ripple effect impact the criminal enterprise as well.
Fascinating thoughts. Renee, do you have anything to share on this topic as well?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with Russell. Fraud is at its height. The attacks are becoming more frequent, but the attack surface has grown with all of us working at home. When you think about our critical infrastructure, the critical infrastructure as it relates to our supply chain and food production and in our healthcare environment, and within our financial sector, all of those things have expanded so differently now, right? When we look at the delivery of healthcare now being all the way to the home, even as far as from a healthcare perspective, looking at, the targets, the exploits are targeting our laboratories even more for vaccine research information and clinical trial information. And so things are different, right? When you think about our food supply, you never thought about the grocery store, the activities at the grocery store now being, critical. That was mainly just in the food production area. So, an attack now on our critical infrastructure really affects us at a core of our health and safety and our environment.
So I'd actually love to build on that a little bit more. You speak about the new attack surfaces. How have you evolved to protect against these new threat models?
Well, I think one thing that is key is that you have to look in places where you haven't looked before, right? Look beyond the typical, the CVE or whatnot. I think the use of, for us, open source intelligence, being able to shift our models and surveillance of companies and areas within our supply chains and look at them differently has been key. A key way to begin to look at the exploits differently, monitor them in a different way. And the great thing about it is that the tool sets that support that open source intelligence that you have available to you now has become more robust. So the timing is perfect for that.
Russ, any thoughts from your side?
Oh, absolutely. I have all kinds of crazy thoughts. Now what I have seen over change as it relates to how the edge is defined from a corporate asset now versus what it was this time last year was that there was a lot of rush to engineer to support infrastructure for work from home that was never, pardon the pun, remotely considered before. But the opportunity that activities like this create for adversaries is very, very, very fruitful, because there's opportunity for mistake made in the architecture and the engineering of pushing that edge further out to envelop more of the personal assets inside of a home. I have not seen really good policy mentioned by any organization where they say, hey, we now have everyone working from home. We would like to be able to provide additional protection for your other IT assets inside your house. Because those other things like the TV sets, the IoT sort of stuff, to other devices that now have cross connection into multiple corporate environments from one central hot point, provides itself its own opportunity. And that is an attack vector that I had seen before in a prior life, where the actual target was in the financial services industry, but the hot point was the spouse that worked in an educational environment. And the actors targeted the spouse's laptop and attempted the pivot from one device to the other within the wireless network of their home. because they knew that the perimeter defense infrastructure did not extend that far out. So from the mindset of who's watching the firewall logs of their customer premise equipment or their home routers or anything like that, the answer is just about on par with whenever I used to respond to computer intrusions of who's watching your logs here, and the answer was this person over here who probably wasn't anyways. So it's the change of the perimeter has created a new opportunity, especially with what we see in White Ops in the sense of a surprising amount of infections inside of IoT-based devices like TV sets and other media players that are essentially just, it's another computer on your network that no one has visibility of. So it's that's kind of the big concern that I have at this particular point as we move forward in the next 6 months.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's so many great things that you guys are kind of bringing up during this fireside chat. And I'm feeling very inspired by having both of you having very extensive backgrounds in with both the law enforcement and then also financial sector, where some of the stakes are very comparable. Maybe Russell, we can start with you. How has a nation state versus the criminal motivations changed at all from an economic incentive standpoint? Renee had mentioned earlier about the critical infrastructure and the impacts on that, and the opportunity it presents from a nation state standpoint. Like, do you have any thoughts to share about how that dynamic has changed with the current landscape?
I have some observations that are based on some recent indictments as of even this last week by the Department of Justice as it relates towards, for lack of a better term, spies in the United States stealing intellectual property as it relates to COVID research in order to send back to their countries. And then there's also other countries that have big pharmaceutical research occurring within them, and they're also reporting a huge increase in traditional nation state sets, targeting them as well specifically for that research. And a long time ago, I came under, I came to the opinion that there's a gentleman's agreement to espionage for the most part. And the newer countries that are emerging into the space were not incumbent to that older agreement that was seemingly founded during the Cold War time period, in which you go after your enemy but leave the civilians on the side out of it. New players to the game have leveraged their access to the internet to the point where everyone is a target and a potential pivot for them. So what we're seeing, I think, as a society, is another demonstration of fundamentally the value of the mission that White Ops has, which drew me to it, which is to impact the economics of cybercrime. And functionally, these nation-state intrusions are there to provide economic boom for their own countries. They're stealing the intellectual property to be able to make money off of it, fundamentally at the end of the day. I don't necessarily believe in altruistic sense of large government entities, short of ours, but the constructs associated with where there's a dollar to be made, there's a crime to be committed as well. And both criminal and nation state actors are extremely similar in that construct. It's just their tools and methodologies are very different, and most of the time. But at the end of the day, what we are seeing as a society is a very strong highlight to the criminal nature associated with these nation state actors, specifically by example of criminal indictments coming from the Department of Justice, which I think is awesome. No more time for them to, oh, no longer are we allowing them to just operate with impunity under that previous gentleman's agreement of espionage. It's you're breaking the law, stop it. And I appreciate the direct exposure of these activities more publicly.
Renee, building off of that a little bit, do you see nation state versus criminals as two separate entities, and how do you approach that when it comes to reinforcing your security protocols?
Well, to be honest with you, to Russell's point, right now, because the world in and of itself is in a certain state, the behaviors are so similar. The motivations might be different, but the behaviors are similar. I do want to touch on something that Russell had said earlier in reference to the attack surface extending to the home, and the changes that will have to eventually come about because of that. Everyone in the world had to do whatever they had to do over the last few months to keep the infrastructures that sustain our lives going, right? But that being said, I do believe that once everyone catches their breath, that there will have to be decisions made about how do we handle the new threat vectors and the new attack surface that we now live with, right? So out of that, I see new tools, of course, coming out. Will there be changes to legislation around privacy? Privacy is a whole different thing to Russell's point when you're talking about my TV or it could be my refrigerator, right? That tells me I'm out of milk. That could be used to tap into a corporate network via, the same router that we're all going through, right? In one household. So I think that where we are, not only as a country, but as a world at this point, will spawn new tool sets, and it will spawn new regulations. But at the same time, it'll spawn new criminals, right? Because they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. But we do have to begin to think differently about where we are, what we have, and questions will be posed to people. People themselves will have to think differently as individuals. Will we as people be willing to give up a certain level of privacy in our own homes that we may not have thought of giving up 6 months ago, right? But again, I think to look at where we are as a world, not even as a country, but as a world right now, things will definitely change from a technological perspective on both sides of the fence, both for the actor as well as the little old person at home just trying to do work. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'd actually like to build on top of that a little bit. So you had mentioned new tools and tech innovation. I'm sure we have a wide-ranging audience joining us today, and some with their own homegrown systems, but other who work with vendors to help enable their business. And this constant question of build versus buy. So maybe we'll start with you, Russell. What are your thoughts on risk management when it comes to vendors and partners, many of whom may be building these new tools or leading the way in tech innovation?
Sure. Well, with any kind of research and development process, I approach it from a scientific and engineering mindset. You need to make sure that your sampling and testing experiments are built with minimal bias. And I have seen over my career development a lot of tools that functionally at the end of the day become snake oil. I remember as a very young security researcher and engineer having this really expensive firewall dropped in front of me and saying, hey, reverse engineer this thing, figure out where all the problems in it are. And just by the end of the week, I had developed exploits and capabilities to bypass the whole thing. And it even had a little LCD display in the front of it that I figured out a way to customize. So I don't think the vendor accepted that hardware back into their inventory after that. But functionally, at the end of the day, there's a vector of technology development where if you're going to build it yourself, make sure that you can test it and validate it for its own functionality before full-blown production use. And on the flip side, from a company who's going to decide to purchase something, making sure that they can test and validate the results of whatever it is that's coming in and not just take it at face value. Because technology is built by people, and we write bad software, intentionally or not. And that's what has created this industry of information security. We are functionally, at the end of the day, I feel in a lot of ways, the folks that find hold the developers accountable for mistakes in software. And that's from the risk management aspect of it. I've kind of feel the bigger risk is not being able to, that is equal on both sides, where like the Venn diagram overlaps, is not being able to adequately or correctly test the technology development process or implementation of the technology.
Renee, any thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, one thing I've always said throughout my career, the best defense is a good architecture, right? And that's a good architecture for whatever you're doing. Again, I agree wholeheartedly with Russell on the developers that are out there who are looking, be mindful, and I'd say to them too, look beyond and test well, test to the best of your ability. And to the receivers of those tools, and to the corporations who had to make very quick judgment calls in order to keep the countries and to keep the world afloat. Stay true to some of your basic things, right? Like layered defenses, right? Let's make sure that we have the proper layered defenses built into our architectures. Let's also make sure that we segment, right? A good understanding of what we have and what to do with what we have, and and whether or not that particular thing is the most valuable asset that you have. Sort of lets you know where you need to put your defenses, right? Where the most effort needs to go within your architecture. When you're looking at putting those defenses in, look across the entire span of your architecture. And that goes from everything from your cloud protections to your firewalls and your right down to your email protections. Look holistically, right? Let's look at your access controls. Let's look at privileged access. Let's not be the Wild Wild West and just have access run amok, right? Let's make sure that we're understanding what we're doing from an architectural perspective inside our own infrastructures. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I just think that we need to look forward and be ready to receive all of the new tool sets that are coming toward us as a company. But at the same time, let's make sure that we're doing all of the basic blocking and tackling that, of course, helps to keep our infrastructure safe.
Right. So one of the things that probably weighs on every security teams right now is this concept of cost as well. How do we create anti-fragility? How do we have the layered defenses and still make sure that we're doing it within the restrictions of our budgets and whatnot? Do you have any words of wisdom or any approaches that have worked well for you when trying to make sure the critical infrastructure is reinforced, but also balancing the cost element of it?
Absolutely. You have to decide how much risk you're willing to take on. That's really where the rubber meets the road. Money only goes so far, but sometimes when a vulnerability is realized, um, that could be so damaging that it takes you to a point of no return. That being said, again, you have to think about how much risk you're willing to take on and level that against the expenditure to protect against and to mitigate against that.
Great thoughts. Russell, anything to add?
Whenever having to build something, like right now I have a construction project on my mind, you're going to have to accept the risk that you're probably going to hit your hand with a hammer. Maybe you hopefully stop mid-swing, but you stop that in your experience from it. So what I would say is, as companies need to build these things and look at the task at hand, don't be afraid. You will get hurt. Just have a plan in place for first aid and medical response in the event that you do. So in that construct, as we've built out these new capabilities and such, someone will hack you. Have a plan in place, know who to call, have an escalation process, all that sort of stuff. It's better to have a plan and not need it than need it and not have it. And that would be the main parting advice that I would have as it relates to this.
Great, great. I think we're pretty close to time, so we could probably wrap up unless there's any final thoughts that you guys would like to share with the audience today.
Now, I would like to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to share.
This has been great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Great conversations, and I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of your conference. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kat, Russell, and Renee, for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future soon. Thanks so much.